things. Wrath of the Killer Pumpkins. Stories from the Witch Café. Wrath of the Killer Pumpkins. Welcome one, welcome all to the Moonstone Café. Tonight, seeing as we just made a batch of pumpkin spice cheesecake to go with our famous Halloween latte, I thought a story about pumpkins might be fitting. This story was told long ago in a village that once stood very close to where we all stand now, and I call this one Wrath of the Killer Pumpkins. The widow's name was Ulla, and more than anything, she wanted to win the annual pumpkin festival. Not just for the prize money, but to impress her 6-year-old daughter Rebecca, who loved everything about pumpkins. Their texture, their shape, their color, their smell, everything. But Ulla's pumpkins were nothing compared to her neighbor's pumpkins. Her neighbor Mona won the pumpkin festival every year, and she seemed to have a secret for growing perfect pumpkins. That's not to say Ulla's pumpkins were bad. They weren't. They just weren't very special. At best, they had been described by the great pumpkin judges as average. Average height, average width, average color, average smell, average. And average didn't win awards. Well, not wanting to be average anymore, Ulla decided she needed to know Mona's secret. So one morning, she waited until Mona left for the market, and when she knew the coast was clear, she did the unthinkable. She snuck into her house. To Ulla's amazement, the kitchen was filled with glass jars containing pumpkin seeds of every variety. Each jar had a label that included a name, instructions, and some very peculiar symbols. Reading the labels, Ulla felt a cold shiver run through her body. She couldn't make sense of the names or symbols, and for a moment, just a moment, she suspected witchcraft. Part of her wanted to run, but the other part, the part that hated to lose, wanted a little help, a little boost, a fighting chance to win the festival and make her daughter proud. Ignoring her better instinct to run, Ulla found a jar labeled Mortificus Cucurbus. She scrutinized the label and read that these seeds would produce the biggest and brightest pumpkins, but that they were still quite unstable. The seeds were unstable. Ulla winced, and she had no idea what that meant or how pumpkin seeds could be unstable. She continued to read a warning: no blood, especially at night. She laughed out loud. Who in their right mind would feed a plant blood? Who would heed such a warning? And for a moment she really thought that maybe, just maybe, Mona was a witch. A powerful witch who could defy nature and modify and mutate seeds. Despite the creepy warnings, Ulla borrowed one seed, just one, from the Mortificus Cucurbus jar, convincing herself that she would give Mona back a seed from her winning pumpkin. With that promise, she convinced herself she wasn't stealing, and she quickly returned to her small, humble farm. No sooner did Ulla return home than she planted the seed in her garden. To her amazement, there was a visible pumpkin growing the very next day. And every day after that, more pumpkins appeared, linked to a thorny green vine, unlike anything she had ever seen before. Well, to be sure, Rebecca jumped up and down with joy at the sight of the massive pumpkins. She couldn't stop hugging and measuring and sniffing the pumpkins. When the time came, Ulla told Rebecca to choose a pumpkin for the festival. And as she selected the choicest pumpkin from the patch, she got so excited that she tumbled into the thick green vines and cut herself against the thorns. The vines and pumpkins trembled momentarily with sudden life. Ulla dismissed the sudden movement as the wind and proceeded to dress her daughter's wounds. Then she placed the chosen pumpkin on a wheelbarrow and pushed it to the market to face the judges of the Great Big Pumpkin Festival. It didn't take long to declare Ulla the winner, and Rebecca jumped up and down and she screamed and celebrated that they had finally won the festival. Ulla reveled in her daughter's joy and felt a great surge of pride. But that joy was short-lived when Mona suddenly emerged from the crowd, admiring the winning pumpkin and sniffing it as though searching for a signature scent, a telltale, proof that Ulla had stolen one of her seeds. Then she put her ear to the pumpkin and locked eyes with Ulla. For a moment, it seemed as though she wanted to say something. But then Mona smiled, gave the pumpkin a gentle caress, and walked away. Ulla watched Mona until she disappeared, and she told herself she would gut her winning pumpkin and return a seed back to Mona just as soon as she returned home. And so, with exhausted arms, Ulla wheelbarrowed her pumpkin down the dirt road, with her daughter singing and skipping behind her in the moonlight. Caught up in the euphoria of winning, Ulla tried to skip with her daughter, but she missed a beat and twisted her foot on a stone. Ulla stumbled forward, lost control of the wheelbarrow, and the great big pumpkin tumbled out, smashing against a massive stone. Suddenly, mother and daughter froze in terror. Thick orange liquid like blood poured out of the busted pumpkin. Through the cracks they could see something moving, something breathing. Ulla approached the pumpkin slowly. She hesitated, then placed her fingers in the pulpy crack and pulled and pulled and... Whee! A pumpkin baby burst out and attached itself to her face. Pulp dripping down her face and back, Ulla ripped the pumpkin baby off her face and smashed it repeatedly against the ground as it wailed and screamed and finally died. Then she dropped the limp, pulpy corpse in the grass and watched it melt into a thick orange puddle of steaming pumpkin pus. Ulla grabbed her daughter by the hand and rushed home, but when they reached home, the whole farm had been overrun by gigantic bright orange pumpkins and thick vines with thorns like knives. Wanting to burn the pumpkin patch down, Ulla held her daughter close, and she led her to the shed as the vines trembled, slithered, and brushed by their feet. Then, all at once, the vines coiled around their ankles and... whap! Mother and daughter hit the ground as throbbing vines wrapped around them like hungry snakes. Ulla stared in horror as massive pumpkins seemed to suddenly hatch like giant orange eggs in the moonlight. From those pumpkins came creatures staggering on 2 legs with long, clumsy vines for arms. And as these killer pumpkins closed in on Ulla, she noticed they had orange and green skin and thick thorns for feet, and the faces. They resembled her daughter. Before she could make sense of what she was seeing, an evil vine coiled around her neck and head, and thirsty thorns pierced her skin and gorged on her blood, as hundreds of newborn pumpkin monsters wailed at the moon, and a cold darkness swept over her. As for the younglings, they grew and multiplied and went on a murderous rampage throughout the town. But rest assured, they were finally stopped by a few good witches with some pretty powerful spells. But that's another story for another dark and creepy night. Let's just agree that we shouldn't mess around with pumpkin seeds, and that we prefer to eat our pumpkins than be eaten by them.